Well, this is live in Hiroshima, Japan, and the leaders who are gathered for the summit, for the Hiroshima summit, just had a family photo op, which includes the group of 7 countries and also the countries that were invited, which include Brazil, India, Australia, the Comoros Islands, and the Cook Islands. So all of them had a family photo just moments ago in front of the Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima, Japan. And we understand that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has already arrived at the summit. He's supposed to give a speech moments from now at the Hiroshima summit in Japan. He's also supposed to meet some of the leaders who have converged at this year's crucial summit in Japan. And also, the countries that have been invited by the group of 7 are called the outreach group or the outreach program. And these are countries including Australia, Brazil, India, the Comoros Islands, the Cook Islands, like I mentioned. And President Zelensky is expected to meet some of the leaders of this outreach program or this outreach group, which includes the 8 countries that have been invited to this year's summit in Hiroshima, Japan. So this is the photo op that just happened moments ago, where the group of 7 countries, together with the delegates from the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and also the European Union, and the 8 countries which were invited by the group of 7 to attend this summit as observer states, posed for a photo which they're calling a family photo at the ongoing Hiroshima. Our principal diplomatic correspondent, Sidhan Sibol, is following this Hiroshima summit very closely. Sidhan Sibol, probably you can tell us the latest, apart from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arriving at the summit. What else do we expect today, being the second day of the summit?
Well, Eric, 2 things have happened in past 1 hour. One, of course, the joint communique of the G7 being released that specifically mentions about Russia and China, which was no surprise. But the language, of course, is something that everyone was waiting for. Now, when it comes to China, the message is clear by the G7 countries that nobody plans to stop the development of China, but China needs to follow the international rules-based order. Second, of course, the outreach summit, which is something that saw the participation of 8 invited countries, including India. We saw that family photo of the 7 countries and the 8 invited countries. So 15 countries present together at that family photo. And essentially this outreach meeting, which has started essentially earlier today, will be focusing on the problems faced by the global south. Now, countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil have been facing a lot of issues, especially high commodity prices because of the ongoing conflict in Europe. So essentially that will be the focus for next 12 hours now, with all these leaders present. We know that President Zelensky is already here, and tomorrow he will be meeting the leaders of the G7 and also the 8 invited countries together, in which he's expected naturally to talk about the Ukrainian perspective of the conflict in Europe.
Sidhan Sibol, we do also understand that the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has already held what they're calling bilateral talks with the 8 invited countries, which include India. Do we know what Kishida discussed with Modi?
Well, the readouts have been issued by both the Indian side and the Japanese side. And remember, Japan is the chair of the G7 and India is the chair of the G20. Now, both countries will be keen to synchronize their presidency and how both countries can work together at a time of great geopolitical flux. Other than that, focus was on the Indo-Pacific vision. Both Tokyo and New Delhi have been strong supporter of the Indo-Pacific vision. In fact, the Japanese Prime Minister had visited India earlier this year and laid out his vision of the Indo-Pacific. The fact that he chose India to give his vision of the Indo-Pacific is significant enough, and how Japan sees India's role as part of its wider Indo-Pacific vision and policy. So that was the key focus area. But the relationship between India and Japan is multi-pronged, multifaceted, whether it's the Japanese role in India's developments, projects like the bullet train or infrastructure projects in India's northeast.
Siddhant Sabol, we've been talking about the attendance of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in this crucial summit. Do you have any more information about what he will do today and tomorrow? Will he give a speech? Will he be talking to the outreach program, which includes the 8 countries that have been invited in the summit? Or will he give a speech to the delegates who have converged in Hiroshima?
Well, it is natural for President Zelensky to use this platform to further his goals and talk about the problems faced by his country at a time of this invasion of the Russian side. And he will be using this to the hilt. We do expect not only he meeting the G7 leaders, but all the invited countries. Now, we have seen so far President Zelensky traveling abroad, going to US, going to other countries in Europe. But this is his first visit to Asia, and he would like to give an in-person perspective about the conflict. But I doubt that the Asian countries like India and Indonesia are going to change their perspective. Most of these countries have had a neutral stance when it comes to the conflict. They have been pressing forward on the worries of the global south, like high commodity prices, food prices, fuel prices. And these countries will be keen that President Zelensky does or takes actions which perhaps make sure that the conflict is resolved. So far, there is no sight of the conflict getting resolved. It's been over 1 year since the conflict started, and its repercussions are felt by everyone, whether a person is in Europe or, of course, in Asia. So essentially, that will be the focus of President Zelensky. And largely, we know that President Zelensky will be keen that India, as the chair of the G20, invites President Zelensky for the G20 summit. So far, there hasn't been any word by New Delhi, but earlier we saw in last few weeks the visit of the Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister, who was very keen that India invites Ukraine to the G20 summit.
Siddhant Sabol, apart from the Ukraine war and China, we also had moments ago the European Union President Ursula von der Leyen saying and even talking about the pandemic. I think most people had forgotten to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, but now this European Union President is saying that the world will be better prepared for the next pandemic. Do we know more information about her speech and what entails the pandemic?
Well, when it comes to future health emergencies, there is a lot to learn from the COVID pandemic, whether it's geopolitics or geoeconomics. Now, focus from the COVID crisis has been how countries can work together. India has been a major player in terms of providing countries support and help with vaccines. India provided vaccines to over 100 countries amid the COVID pandemic, something India has reiterated multiple times. But how the developed world take stock of it and how it's willing to work with developing world will be key focus area. We know it's just not the COVID pandemic, but focus on its ripple effects, the disruption it caused, especially when it comes to supply chains. Now, resilient supply chain has been a focus area by these leaders. We know a joint statement has been issued, and there has been a specific mention on making sure that the supply chains are diversified in case of crisis in one part of the world, which could impact the other part of the world, something we saw during the COVID pandemic.
Live from Hiroshima, Japan, our principal diplomatic correspondent, Sithan Sebol, continued following all the updates in the summit. We'll talk to you later.